Ladies and gentlemen, we've found our right seats. I hope that you're comfortable on your seats. I would like to welcome you all very warmly to this panel on the subject Climate Change Divide. The fact that so many people have scorned the nice weather outside to sit in this dark hall shows how important the subject is. 2007 is probably going to go down in history as the year of change in climate protection. No one doubts seriously anymore that we as human beings have contributed quite considerably to climate change. Polar bears looking for ice, pictures that went around the world. Al Gore and the climate change UN agency have received the Nobel Prize, and in the elections in Switzerland, the Green Party surged forward, and even those who found that this was not an important subject think it has become more important. The Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, said and stated very clearly at the summit on climate change in Bali that it is a matter of survival of mankind, no less, no more. Everyone agrees that pollution cannot continue apace. Climate protection has to be stepped up. We have to reduce carbon emission. An increase in temperature of 2 degrees is expected by the year 2100, but that of course would mean a terrible degradation of the climate and the environment. So the question is, who is supposed to do what? Is the emerging economies like Brazil, China, or India contribute the same as the industrialized countries? Do they have to deploy the same efforts? And that's the beginning of the quarrel, because everyone is trying to pass the buck. It's always the others who should do something, and most urgently the United States claim that the emerging and developing countries are the ones that have to make greater efforts, and the developing countries maintain that it is the industrialized countries that are the main polluters, and therefore they should show the way in climate protection. So how can these political tensions and frictions be overcome? How can all countries participate equally and sensibly in environmental protection? That's the main subject today. So we'll first give the floor to the panelists, and then we'll have a discussion with the audience. We have an awful lot of science and knowledge accumulated here on the panel, coming from all around the globe, and I'll introduce the panelists very briefly to you. Christine Mumenthaler on my right, as his name indicates, is the Swiss on the panel. He works for the largest reinsurance company of the world, Swiss Re. Until January, he was in charge of risk management of Swiss Re, and now is at the head of health and life products. Mr. Mumenthaler has studied molecular biology and biophysics. On my left, Luis Fernando Furlan from Brazil. He is chairman of the board of GALF Empreendimentos, which is a company which is mainly active and investing in renewable energies like ethanol. He was also responsible for foreign trade of Brazil. That is to say, he was a member of the government of Lula until last year. C.S. Qiang comes from the Republic of China, and he told me I shouldn't even try and pronounce his first name, so I'll not try, since I won't succeed. He is chairman of the Peking or Beijing University Environment Fund, which has the responsibility of dealing with China's environmental problems, therefore a worldwide problem. For more than 40 years, Mr. Qiang worked in the United States, and he is trying to bring the United States and China to act jointly against climate change, and you can understand that that's not the easiest of ventures. We are particularly pleased that Ichiro Kamoshita from Japan is with us today. He told me that he'll be staying only for 5 hours in Davos. He will have to leave us right away after the panel and returned to Japan. So we are very grateful to him for having contributed some of his time to us. Mr. Kamoshita is Minister of Environment. He studied medicine, and at the beginning of his career, he was also at the head of a clinic, a medical clinic in Japan. Mr. Kamoshita will be speaking Japanese, I beg your pardon, and you will then get translation into German and French and English. Sorry. Then, last but not least, Achim Steiner. He said of himself that first and foremost he was an environmental protectionist and only then a German national. He grew up on a farm in Brazil and studied economics, philosophy, and politics. And he is now the successor of Klaus Töpfer at the head of the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme. He lives in Nairobi in Kenya with his family, and we know in Kenya there are completely different problems to contend with just now than climate problems. Let me then start with personal questions. 2,500 decision makers are in Davos at present, so a lot of CO2 and hot air is being emitted. Did you travel in a neutrally climatic way to Davos with a good conscience? Mr. Mumenthaler? Yes, but it's not my fault. I think it's mainly a question of dialogue, the protection of the climate. All sorts of parties have to get down and talk together, and the most important point is to meet and to get to know each other. But my question, did you come by car or by train? No, I came by car, but I can assure you and reassure you, I take the train every day, but simply because I'm such a terrible driver. Well, that's perhaps better. So not quite neutral, carbon neutral. Mr. Fulan, you flew from Brazil, and have you compensated for your CO2 emission since then?
Yes, unfortunately I could not come swimming.
Okay. Das ist akzeptiert.
Yeah, well, we do accept that.
But I believe that with the new foundation that I'm heading right now for conservation of 17 million hectares in the Amazon region, we are offsetting the carbon of everybody here and many millions more.
Okay. Ihr Gewissen ist also in
So you have a pure conscience. Mr. Kiang, did you offset your ticket from China?
Take the from China, but I think I will never get over here. And of course, I think we're very conscious about the problem. And also, I would like to say one thing, and this is the consequence of the Industrial Revolution. And we consider this as a Faust spirit, which we know everything. In the end, we sell our soul to the devil.
Mr. Kamoshita, you are Minister of the Environment in Japan. In Switzerland, you can buy My Climate tickets, so your conscience is slightly purer when you buy such a ticket. So have you offset your CO2 emission?
今回はですね、残念ながら私たちは大変急いできましたんで、オフセットはできませんでした。ただ今年は日本で G8 のサミットがありますが、この G8 サミットはぜひですね、すべての部分についてオフセットをしたいと、こういうふうに考えています。
Unfortunately, as far as this particular trip to Davos is concerned, we were in such a hurry that we were not able to offset our carbon emission caused by our trip. However, regarding the upcoming G8 summit, which will be held in Hokkaido, Japan this year in summertime, we are intended to offset all of the emissions caused by the G8 summit.
Good.
Excellent. What about you, Mr. Steiner? Everyone has to have a good excuse. As the head of the UNEP and the UN agency, do you have any pretext or excuse or not? Well, I can tell you that since I've become the director of UNEP, I have taken it as a personal honor point to offset my CO2 emission and have even paid it from my own pocket. But since December, the UNEP is the first agency to be completely CO2 neutral. But UNEP is not yet paying for the offsetting. Yes, the organization will do it from now on. Last year I paid personally.
Ich denke, wir sollten alle hier.
I think we all should have a bad conscience here. I spoke with the CEO of Swiss. On the website of Swiss, you can click on a box and you can buy your ticket as a carbon neutral one. And he told me that only 1%, less than 1% of people who buy tickets on the internet from Swiss actually do this. Okay, though those who have been laughing should look at themselves first before they laugh at others. Okay, we've all come, or most of you have come from all over the world. Could you perhaps describe climate change in your own country? What are the greatest fears of the population? What are the greatest disasters? And what are the most important problems? Mr. Steiner, you live in Kenya. Obviously, there are political problems now, but what have the Kenyans noticed so far? Answer. Our scientific knowledge has helped us to understand the connections, the relations between the various phenomena, and the Kenyans really see it mostly because of the change in weather, and they've noticed the consequences. More rain. In the past few years, we've had not only terrible drought, but also terrible floods in various parts of the country, and every farmer will tell you that there's a change, a shift in the seasons and the calendar and the dates, and that has terrible effects on agriculture. And most of you know that Kilimanjaro will lose its ice cap on the peak because of the climate change, and that is going to change the entire water resource in the catchment area of the Kilimanjaro. Mr. Fulan, have you noticed similar phenomena? Have you had major disasters in the recent past which seem to indicate that it comes from climate change?
Brazil, as you know, is a very large country with 8.5 million square kilometers. So we faced 2 years ago a very dry season in the south of Brazil. And as the majority of our electricity comes from hydroelectric power plants, so clean energy.
Well, we'll come back to how this is really very clean energy or not.
When you compare with fuel or carbon or coal, it's clean, and the water keeps going clean. But what I mean is that we have a shortage of water in the dams, and so we had to consider additional energy for that. But right now we are facing a quite normal season.
And what about China, Mr. Qiang? The glaciers are also melting in China, we hear.
Not only that, I think the sea level is going higher. I don't know, you know the recent data in the Shanghai in about the 30 years, and the sea level going up about the 7 inches. So also the weather pattern is very different, which have an impact on the water resource. And also that not only the climate change, and also even the environmental issue so bad, the air quality so poor, that not only change the climate, they also change the weather, the modification, the rainfall becomes smaller, the ecosystem, and suddenly with sense, they have a different way of the precipitation level. So I think it's definitely serious, have an impact. I think most impact could be related climate change, and it's possible health, environmental health, due to the climate change.
Yeah. Yes, maybe our country is less affected than other countries because we keep today 69% of the forest that we had 1,000 years ago. And as you know, Europe has only 0.3%.
Mr. Kamoshita, how have the Japanese noticed that things are changing in terms of climate?
私は1月の初めにですね、ツバルという国に行きました。南太平洋の島です。 もうすでにですね、海面上昇によって国土が沈もうとしています。
Well, this January, I visited Tuvalu, which is located in the southern Pacific Ocean, and I noticed that the water level has been increasing, and some part of the island is submerged.
彼らはとても深刻に受け止めていて、我々ですね、先進国でエネルギーを使うことが結果的にそういう国に大変な影響を及ぼすと、こういうような想像力を持つ必要があると思います。
So I think that the use of energy by developed countries has a severe impact in those countries, such as small islands. We have to have such imagination or creativity to think about other countries.
あともう一つだけ、私は一番心配しているのは、この気候変動がですね、これから大きくなると、一番大きな問題は食料の問題です。例えば、大豆だとか小麦だとか、そういうようなもののですね、値段が上がってきて、貧しい人たちが買えなくなると、こういうようなことが起こるのが一番心配です。
Another point I like to raise here is that my biggest concern is that due to as a result of the climate change, the biggest problem I could think of is the food problems, specifically the price of soybeans and wheat might rise, and poor people might not be able to buy those food. That is one of the biggest concerns that I have.
Jetzt haben wir verschiedene.
We've heard now of all sorts of examples from different countries. In Switzerland, we are aware of some of these problems. You are in a company that has to assess these risks. How terrible are the risks going to be, and what disasters will we have to look forward to if we don't take any action now? Well, we have been committed for the last 15 years to drawing the attention of the world to all these risks and disasters, possible disasters, and it's only been for about 1 or 2 years that the mood has changed and that people are starting to think about it seriously, that's to say the public in general and countries in particular. As to the economy, well, we get all our knowledge from the IPCC. We don't do our own studies, and even the scientists don't know exactly what is going to happen. And regardless of how much we doubt that there will be any disasters, the margins, the range of possible outcomes of effects are quite wide. There are all sorts of scenarios which are very disastrous, quite disastrous. And even if there's only a 50% chance of this happening, then it's still really urgent to act. But I wouldn't say there's only one scenario that will take place. All the risks are interconnected. There's climate change, there's food security, prices of food and of staples for the population to have enough food, water, political stability, immigration, migration. The whole system is very, very complex, and it's very difficult to give you just one figure, but we all have to realize that if we don't act rapidly, there will be a or several disasters. I think then that everyone has understood that there is need for action. Let's look then first at the industrialized countries, the United States, Canada, Russia, Japan, the EU, all agree, I think, that they have a lot of responsibility in the warming of the globe and the climate. I'd like to first ask the representatives of Brazil and China whether you agree with this statement that they are now realizing that there is some responsibility to be borne, or do you think there's still too much talk and not enough action? Mr. Kiang. China is always very critical regarding the industrialized countries.
I don't know where you get that impression, but I hope.
Aus Peking zum Beispiel.
Well, from Beijing, for example.
I think China and thinking about the world, you should use at least the statement is in harmony. The world needed in harmony. And Chinese, if you look at the civilization, look at the culture, they believe the heaven and humanity and are in unity. So never try to conquer the nature. So I hope you say, let's look at the story, not just look at the next few years or last past. We usually look at very long term, 1,000 years, 100 years. And so we have to look at that. So sometimes we talk about climate change, and that's the impact of our industrial revolution, which will bring a lot of people in good life. But in the meantime, there are about another 5.5 billion people at this moment, this time. We have to consider the implication of the climate change.
Aber eben die Frage,
The industrialized countries, the economic powers like the United States, Russia, the European Union, are they now proving that they want to do something about protecting the environment and climate change?
I think so. I think it's a good process at this moment, this time. Obviously, we have a difference. And sometimes we only count about how much CO2 we emit now. We never talk about the aggregated historical record. So sometimes you need to combine all this together. Sometimes the CO2 emission for people is a luxury. Sometimes CO2 emission for people is life, survive. They still have to do that. So how are you going to balance that? So I think we should base on the principle of equity. Equity, not just talk about human rights. I think this is equity. We have to thinking about all different elements.
darüber werden wir sprechen.
We'll come back to that. Mr. Furlan, what do you think? Are the industrialized countries assuming their responsibility? Are they doing their job? Are they still resting on their laurels?
I think we all share common responsibilities related to global warming. And I believe that what was mentioned by my colleague is that some that have destroyed much more their own environment, like the old countries and some new countries like US, they have greater responsibilities than emerging markets that are still conserving a large part of the forest. But I can tell you that in my country, this issue is in the front pages of today. We are looking to measure the deforestation of the Amazon region. We are taking measures for enforcement, and we have a system today with the satellites in order to monitorize where are people trying to find gold or other people trying to cut trees. And the perception of the population today is that the trees up have a much better value than to cut down. But as in everywhere in the world, there is always somebody trying to make money destroying the environment. So in the schools today in Brazil, it's mandatory to have teachers telling about the conservation and environment. So we have new generations today with a lot of conscience and of course the use of ethanol, the biofuels in Brazil. It's today 90% of the brand new cars, and we produce 3 million cars per year. 90% of these cars have engines that can run full ethanol or blended with gasoline, and that is reduction of emissions in the largest cities.
Herr Stein.
The moderator. Mr. Steiner, well, I think these views are fairly clear as regards the situation in relation to the industrialized countries. We've heard that something is being done, but you once said very clearly it's the industrialized countries which really must take action. Have they been lazy, or haven't they really understood their responsibility yet? Well, in 2008, I don't think we can speak of industrialized countries and developing countries as two different groups. Industrialized countries include Japan, the USA, for example, and Japan. And I don't think we can say that the climate policy is the same in all these countries. I think what we have to do is to look at the issue that working on the basis of blocks, and that is no good. Economic activities carried out by China, India, those major economies, South Africa and Brazil, cannot be compared with the consequences of countries such as Rwanda, Bangladesh and Bolivia. And we particularly have to bear this in mind in relation to climate change. In 2007, in the general public discussion, we noticed, I think, and began to understand that climate change, global warming, is not an issue which should divide us, but it is something which affects all of us. And the capacity to react is another matter. That is very different. And then there's the question of who is responsible. The principle of responsibility. We can't just act and behave as if the last 200 years of history didn't take place, didn't occur. The problems we are facing today have been created by somebody, and it was the industrialized countries. And I very much regret that in 2008 and in Bali, we're still at the point where we're trying to deal with the issue of climate change on the basis of national and economic interests in a very narrow manner, and that we're sticking to these blocks, these groups, and that's not going to lead us anywhere. It's a dead end. We in Europe have some countries who really are attacking this question of climate change, and there are countries such as China and Brazil where initiatives have been taken, they've been thought about these problems of climate change, and action has been taken. The moderator. Yes, but can real protection of the climate by the old nations, let's call them, the old industrialized nations, can that really be successful if the United States, unfortunately we don't have anybody from the United States on the panel, but if the United States doesn't join the battle, so to speak, or possibly when there's a change of president, there may be more activity in connection with climate change when there's been this change of president. Well, I think we have to recognize the role of the United States. We can't do anything without the United States, nor without China. But the question is, why is this principle immediately translated into a formula where the United States and China today and tomorrow, that they have to play their role? We need all countries, 190 of them, all countries, in order to have a truly economically compatible climate policy. We need Basically, what we need is a framework where we can act together. No country should suffer if they join this group. Mr. Minister.
議定書ができて10年になります。ある意味でですね、世界の中での試みとしては非常に良かったけれども、欠陥がありました。一つは、主要排出国が参加しなかったこと。加えてですね、今の枠組みだけでは多分すべての国が入らないと、こういうようなことがあります。
So it has been 10 years that Kyoto Protocol was adopted and signed. Kyoto Protocol was a good framework and instrument. However, there were some disadvantages and insufficiency. First of all, some of the major emitters did not participate to the Kyoto Protocol. And on top of that, there was no further efforts for the further reductions exceeding the current level.
ただ去年のですね、バリは私は大成功だったと思います。すべての国が入る新たな枠組みが出来上がったと、こういうような意味では大変成功だったと思います。
However, the Bali conference held in December last year was a big success in my view because a brand new framework was created as an outcome of Bali conference, and in this new framework, all of the countries are participating too.
もちろんアメリカも入りました。そして中国も合意しました。そういう意味ではですね、成功です。ただ、その中で大変な対立がありました。一つは先進国と新興工業国、そして、G77 といういわば途上国、この3つのですね、グループが激しい対立をしました。
Obviously, United States have decided to participate to this new agreement, and China also agreed to this new agreement. So Bali, in this sense, was a truly big success. Having said that, during the course of the Bali conference, there have been quite vibrant objections and oppositions of opinions. There were a majorly talking three different groups. One is the developed countries, secondly, emerging countries, and thirdly, the so-called G77 or developing countries. And amongst these three different countries of groups, there have been vibrant conflicts of opinions.
我々はこれから2年の時間があります。そしてコペンハーゲンでのですね、COP15 できちんとした合意を取り付けなければいけない。そのために先進国は何をやるか、このことについてはですね、我々みんなが受け止めてしっかりと考えなければいけない。それは途上国に対する支援、あるいはですね、新興工業国に対してどういう技術を先進国が供与していくか、こういうような問題を我々は謙虚に考えなければいけない。こういうことだと思います。
We, from now on, have a 2-year time leading up to the COP15 conference, which will be held in Copenhagen. And in that juncture, in COP15 in Copenhagen, 2 years from now, we need to reach a proper and correct agreement. And for that aim, what industrialized countries do as of now, this very question must be seriously addressed by all of us, in my opinion. That question can be, for example, what kind of assistance should we bring to the developing countries, as well as what kind of technologies we as industrialized countries can transfer to emerging countries. Those questions must be very sincerely and with a modesty addressed by us.
I cannot agree with you more. I think we shouldn't take a defensive attitude to talk about climate change. We should look into the climate change. It's the first time our human beings are fighting in the same common cause. We need to work together. How are we going to work together? That's not easy. Even European Commission, you take 20 years, you still have a problem. And how are you going to get the whole global to get together? It's not an easy task. Let's not try to avoid it, but let's take a positive way. Instead of we defend, like you're China or U.S., and we try to point the finger, and we should figure out a way. Specific on this economic crisis, we need a new model, a new mindset, and to look into climate change could be a best challenge for all humankind. How we can work together, that is the way we should look into it. So I do not like to be friend into, you Chinese or you American. I would like to consider we're all the world citizens. We need to work together.
Gut, also diskutieren.
The moderator, good. Let's take that point up then. First of all, I would like to say that, of course, I'm find it a little awkward as regards China, because I've heard that there are 3,000 new cars on the road in Peking every day, and then the question of justice comes up. Does every Chinese have the right to have a vehicle, a car, as we have, and as the Americans have? Is there a sort of justice and a fairness here?
Fairness of this. Sometimes you have a double standard. You talk about the human right, then you accuse the Chinese have no right. In the meantime, when Chinese have a car, they shouldn't have it. That's a double standard. That's a double standard is the one we should try to avoid. Okay, we try to have a mutual respect. We try to have a mutual understanding. That's much more important. I think you news media have more responsibility sometimes. Try to bring our world more together in harmony.
Gut, sind wir harmonisch?
Moderator, good. Well, let's be in harmony now then. This important question's been raised. Of course, we're all in the same boat, and since Bali, the United States are not out in the cold on their own. And so the question is, how can we help each other? What can the industrialized country do for the developing countries and the emerging countries? Is it a question of providing more money? Is it a question of technologies? What's your idea? How do you feel? And if it's a question of technologies, what technologies?
I just want to say one thing, okay? I'm an American citizen. even though I talk about China. Okay, I think you got to be fair to American. American, maybe they need to change the leader, but not all the American are just act like that.
Gut.
Okay, I think we should respect the peoples. People are the ones which we care. The government is that sometimes they have some positive thing, they have some negative thing, and our people need to speak out. And I think the people need to speak out, say we need to work together. I think the states are much more vibrant than the central government. So sometimes, Europe have a similar problem sometimes.
Okay.
So we have to understand each other.
Gut. Also,
Moderator? Well, let's now talk about mutual assistance and help. What can the developing countries use, and what are the industrialized countries prepared to provide in money or technology? Perhaps they may be prepared to give something free of charge.
私が一つはですね、途上国、特に最貧国に対しては、やはり資金援助をして、そして今、気候変動で起こるさまざまなですね、問題点に対しての適応をきちんとサポートすると、こういうことだと思います。
So first of all, I believe that we do need to provide funds and money to developing countries, and particularly to the least developed countries. By doing so, we have to help them to better adapt themselves to the various problems which are having now as a result of climate change.
あと、日本と中国はすぐお隣ですけれども、北京に行きますと、空気が汚れていて、そして私たちは申し訳ないけども、30年前の東京を思い出すわけであります。
Japan and China are neighboring countries, geographically speaking. When we go to Beijing from Japan nowadays, we just notice that the poor quality of air is such an extent that we are forced to remind of what was the situation 30 years back now in Tokyo, although I feel sorry.
ですから、そういうような意味でですね、私たちは中国に対して、高ベネフィットアプローチというのをやっています。それはどういうことかというと、例えば石炭の火力発電所のですね、エネルギー効率を上げて、そしてその技術を提供することによって、大気汚染という、局地的なですね、公害を、克服して、結果的に地球温暖化にも資すると、こういうようなことでお互いに技術協力をしようと、こういうような取り組みをしています。
Therefore, Japan has already initiated a co-benefit approach vis-à-vis China. What are we doing in this framework of co-benefit approach? For instance, from Japan, technologies has been provided to China in the area of coal-fired energy power plants for the sake of the energy efficiency enhancement in those power generating plants. And by doing so, we have been contributing to the improvement of the air quality to surpass the localized pollution problem of atmospheric pollution. And as a result of that, we, along with China, are also contributing to the battle against the global warming problem.
もう一つですから、それぞれの国が必要なですね、技術、あるいは資金、こういうものをですね、その国の立場に立って先進国は援助並びにですね、支援をしていくと、こういうような姿勢が重要だというふうに思います。
So I would like to say, in short, that what is needed on the part of the industrialized country is to have the right attitude, putting themselves in the shoes of each of respective countries in the developing world and emerging world, to see what is the right technology or funds and money which should be provided to each different countries in those groups in order to cope with this whole problem.
Ist das genau die Art und
Is that exactly the way things should go?
Genau in die Richtung.
Yes, exactly. I think that the solution to the climate problem is not only a question of costs, but this term of co-benefit is something which I think we shall hear much more frequently in the coming years. For a long time, we always lived with a sort of ghost how can we bring about this CO2 reduction, CO2? We can't afford it. But I appeal to all of you when we speak about an economic slowdown and recession. Here, all of a sudden, you'll see that there'll be a discussion which will have perhaps repercussions, negative repercussions on the issue of climate change. In the industrialized countries, I think that the change of our economic, transport and energy systems is going to lead to a benefit for the economy in general. But in the industrialized countries, we cling to yesterday's and today's technologies because we've invested so much in that, but the new technologies are there. And in the developing countries, of course, it's an absolute prerequisite. If we are going to tackle this historical issue and look at what's fair, then there are two reasons why we can't limit ourselves to a few million. It has to be billions which are invested because of equity and fairness. What is in the atmosphere isn't something which has been produced by Kenya, Bhutan or Brazil, but it's come from elsewhere. And secondly, it's in our interests, and here I appeal to how we report on countries such as China. How many of you know, if you read in the newspapers, that there are 2 new coal-powered power plants in China? How many of you know that, in fact, what happens is that there were a lot of old, very polluting plants, and discussions are often not clearly focused. We have to help the developing countries, and they are going to jump over one step in the technological developments. We have to provide assistance to the developing countries. And I think that in Copenhagen 2009, one of the key issues is if we can't find these formula, then we won't be able to have a joint or a worldwide climate policy. Well, Mr. Mumtala, we've heard billions mentioned by Mr. Steiner. Normally, money is promised and then it doesn't appear. Do you think that in this particular case, people are speaking about 50 billion, which should be paid into a fund? Do you think that there's a real hope that this will come into being? Well, I think that there are others who are more competent and who could give a more accurate reply to this question. Of course, business and the corporate world has to make a contribution here. I think the major problem, as I see it, is that so far the major companies are Western-oriented because that's where the money is and where the money is made. And people don't always otherwise have a real understanding, and they don't have contact with the realities of the developing world. And so increasingly I see people in big companies who work together with the NGOs who are close to the realities on the ground. And I see potential there. There's an area we're active in the reinsurance world. Traditionally, it was very difficult in relation to developing countries in Africa to guarantee them enough water. And the traditional model would mean that if we had 600,000 farmers, then after a year where there were problems, then we had to send out people to check whether they'd really lost, how much they'd lost, sort of damage inspectors. Now, with satellite data and weather stations, it's easier to deal with this, to do the work, and we don't have the transport costs anymore. We give a responsibility to a major NGO. They're responsible for distribution, and then if the rain or the amount of rain is lower than, let's say, X or Y, then the insurance money is paid out. The NGO companies can say, well, if it's below X, then there'll be a problem. And we only need to know statistically how often this is likely to occur. And then we can establish a price, so to speak. And so all sorts of innovations are possible, which means that the costs can be drastically cut back. And this means that in Africa, there's more than 100,000 farmers are insured against drought, for example, now. And that's extremely important because after droughts, it's very difficult for people to recover. That's just one example in our industry of reinsurance, and I hope it will be successful. And I think that many other industries are showing interest in trying to find new models, and they're looking to work together with NGOs. Yes, Mr. Forlan, you wanted to speak.
I fully agree that new technologies can help a lot in order to reduce global warming, but the big question is what can we do now? And one of the good examples of technologies available today is what Sweden has adopted. Sweden is blending 10% ethanol to the gasoline. In Brazil, since 20 years, we are using 22% ethanol blended to the gasoline. There is not pure gasoline available for cars in our country. And that reduces a lot the emissions. The question is why Switzerland is not using that technology. It's available. Do you care what kind of fuel are you using in your cars? Normally people don't make these calculations. Would you spend 10 francs per month, Swiss francs, to sponsor 10 hectares of rainforest in the Amazon region for the next 10 years? And you can tell you will be offsetting your own emissions. People don't know how to help. Maybe we could advertise what are the available possibilities for each one of us to move ahead instead of keeping discussions, and maybe in the near future, instead of skiing in Davos, we'll be coming here to get sun tanning during the winter.
Unter Palmen oder so etwas.
Under the palm trees or something like that.
Not palm trees, hopefully.
Yeah, I think I just want to say we should be thinking a little bit out of the box, how to provide a solution. And I think co-benefit is one thing. I just give you another example. China and India, they're low-cost labor, so they have an excess of this foreign currency. In the meantime, and cost maybe Europe, even United States, other advanced countries lose jobs. How about we try to let them have more efficient technology, like Japan, and provide some help to China, and the same thing to India, to other countries. By that way, you call trade, and you can win-win situation. Let's not trap ourselves in the old box. We need to think about something out of the box. Just like some new proposal about the World Bank, we think about how to develop for the future. I think we all need to put ourselves together, from individually, from the country, from the whole thing, and this is an opportunity for us, and we should take it. Mm-hmm. And specifically in this middle school, in the school, we have to let our next generation know there is a hope, and we can work together.
Herr Fulan hat
Mr. Fulan has already referred to this several times. So you think the hope for the future and for youth is bioethanol? It's also been debated here in Davos, the hope of a fuel that is renewable. But isn't it going to cause more damage at the end of the day? The rainforests are endangered. We hear that even bread is becoming more expensive. In Indonesia, there have been demonstrations recently because of the high price of soybean. So is it really the panacea of the future?
I'm not talking about ethanol coming from grains, from corn or some other kind of grains. I'm talking ethanol coming of sugarcane, which is a variety of grass. So it's completely different. So you can have sugarcane in the African countries, you can have in Central America, you can have in India, even in China, even in Japan, Okinawa has sugarcane, I heard. So it's quite a different product than corn. And sugarcane, you can also drink. The ethanol 40% is schnapps at the end. So for 1 unit of energy that you use for production, you get 8 times more. And if you bring ethanol from corn. From 1 unit of energy, you get only 1.4 units. So it's very inefficient to use corn for ethanol. But in the case of sugarcane, Central America, South America, Africa, India, China, many countries can produce that using degraded lands and also pasture that they can move because it's a kind of grass.
Minister, sind Sie auch so?
Mr. Minister, are you also such a great supporter and fan of ethanol, sugarcane?
バイオエタノールの話はですね、私は一番の問題点というのは、バイオエタノールそのものはですね、カーボンニュートラルでいい試みだと思いますが、結果的に食料と競合する部分が出てきます。例えば小麦、大豆、トウモロコシ、これは直接食べるものをエタノールに変えて車を走らせるわけですから、これについてはやはり相当気をつけなきゃいけない。日本の場合にはそれをですね、こういう廃木材をセルロースでそれを糖分に変えて最後にエタノールにするっていう技術を今もうすでに開発して実用してます。
So our bioethanol problem has its own problems. Of course, it is a good attempt because it generates carbon neutrality. However, one of the results is that the use of ethanol, while made of wheat or soybeans and corn, that will be contending against the food production, because those are wheat and soybeans, and those should be edible, but instead those should be provided for the driving the car. So in this case, we have to be very careful about this. In Japan, for example, we have already developed a technology so that we can make a good use of scrap woods to create cellulose and then convert to that sugar, and then finally that will be generating the ethanol. Such a technology we have already successfully developed.
ですから車の燃料にですね、食料からそれを振り向けるということについては、私は慎重にあるべきだというふうに思っています。
So I think we have to take extra care about as to the converting some of the food agriculture product converting into the fuel for the car.
Just to mention, sugarcane in Brazil is using only 2% of the arable land. 2%. 98% is used for food.
Herr Steiner,
Mr. Steiner, what about your opinion regarding the biofuel, and what is the point of view of the UN and the UNEP? Well, it would be nice if we could talk about a point of view of the UN. Sometimes we are of the same opinion as everyone and therefore of no one. We have to be very careful with regard to this subject. 3 years ago, we thought that we were experiencing a nirvana in this public debate, but I think the discussion is now very similar to the one that we had on genetic technology and engineering. We still need a lot of science and knowledge. We need to know more about the life cycles. The figures that we have don't cover all of the figures regarding production, the production cycles the world over. If we want to make good comparisons, we need more information and data. And secondly, the ethanol that is produced in Brazil is not the same as the one produced in Indonesia. In Brazil, only 2% of arable land is being used, whereas in Indonesia, national parks are being used and forested to produce palm oil. So we have to see it from the point of view of agricultural cultivation and land management. And we're already talking about, thirdly, a new generation of bioethanol and biofuel. I'm not saying that the first generation was imperfect. We had celluloses and enzymes, and in 7 years' time we can produce different kinds of bioethanol simply by using the waste that remains once we finish producing whatever crop it is that still is left on the fields. For more of a year, I have been trying to convince the United States and Brazil that we need international standards so that when we gas up at the petrol station, is this a biofuel that has been produced sustainably or not? I really regretted that in the international debate, certain countries are still digging in their heels and refusing to accept such a standard so that the consumer can distinguish between sustainably produced ethanol, bioethanol and biofuel and the one that is not, like palm oil that has been produced in Indonesia that complies with no kind of criteria or standards of sustainable production. That, I think, would be a breakthrough which would allow us to maintain this technology and prevent it from being misused, or that it would then be in competition with food production. First, Mr. Chiang, and then we will have a discussion with the public.
I just want to say that we have the same argument in China and about the ethanol. And in the very beginning, we are used to corn, and we found out there was a mistake. And because they have an impact not only on food, on the feeders for the animal, etc. And then we use agriculture residue, which was the leftover, and we try to use the enzyme and all those things. And at this moment, this time, and the cost still not the benefit at this moment. So maybe need some new know-how and with a little bit cheaper way. I agree. In the future, in the process, we know it's sustainable or not. It's a holistic system. We cannot just look at one thing. The other thing involved is the water, not only just the food, how much water we needed, and how much it costs for the water, which I think is that a very, very big issue too, not only just for food.
Yes, just to clarify, in Brazil we are not using irrigation for sugarcane, so the water comes from the sky. And second, the situation that you described, the offset between sugarcane and grains, is not happening because we'll be harvesting right now, beginning January, the record season for grains this year. And we'll be exporting and supplying China and other countries, and of course Switzerland, if you need, of grains. So it's not a question of supply. It's a question of to use the technologies that are available today and keep searching for new technologies to improve and have more competitivity. So, and to finalize, 1 barrel of ethanol, Brazilian made, is competitive with the oil prices at $35 per barrel.
Very well. Let's now take a turn and listen to what the audience has to say, or what questions that you may have, or criticism that you may have. There are just 2 rules that you have to follow. Please put very short questions and don't forget to introduce yourselves so that we know who we are dealing with. And wait until you get the microphone so that everyone can hear you.
Thank you. My name is Rahul Iyer. I work for a company called Primafuel. We're actually here at the forum as a technology pioneer in next-generation biofuels. I first have a comment and then a question. The comment is to Mr. Schneider's point. on international sustainability standards with respect to biofuels. Of course, new industries are supporting these standards, and I think what's very exciting is that over the last few months, we've seen a lot of convergence on California's low-carbon fuel standard, the United States' new renewable fuel standard focuses on carbon reduction rather than technology-specific, and the EU's new biofuels directive. So I think there's a lot of movement in that direction. We should all be quite pleased with that and follow it closely as citizens. Secondly, we're not a corn ethanol company, but I would like to point out that there's been a debate about corn ethanol without a whole lot of data. And I think it's just interesting to note that the actual supply of corn has grown faster than the demand of corn from ethanol in the United States. That is to say, there should be a net surplus of corn. Can someone please comment on the erratic nature of the commodity markets and how they're responding to $100 barrel oil? I'd take that answer from anybody. Thank you.
Take that. Well, answering your question, I can tell you an old story. I was 18 years old and I went to US in 1965 in July. And my grandfather and myself, we went to the Waldorf Astoria. And the room rate was $32 per night. And every floor has a Coke machine, and with $0.25 you could buy a Coke. And at that time, the price of soybeans was around $200 per ton. So that means that the farmer could spend a week at the Waldorf Astoria and plenty of Cokes with 1 ton of soybeans. 1 year ago, I went to the Waldorf Astoria. The lowest tariff was $360 per night, no window, almost no window, the worst. And Coke machine is $125, and the soybean prices $200. 40 years later. So what is happening today? There is an upgrade of these commodities because due to productivity, new technologies, due to the oversupply along the years, the subsidies in Europe, in the United States, the export subsidies, prices were more or less stable with a lot of volatility, but if you take 30 years graph, you'll see the soybean price was around $6 per bushel. Today is over 12. So new prices came to stay, like nobody's waiting for the oil barrel to go back to $16 as it was by 2002. So there is a new situation. China is buying more food. People is becoming rich, or at least less poor, and in habits of consumption are different. When I was first time visiting China in 1982, nobody was fat. You could not find one Chinese with a belly. No one. Well, Mao Zedong was already dead. But anyway, today is different. It's plenty of McDonald's. There is a lot of beer. You couldn't have cold beer in China 25 years ago. And today, everywhere. So the habits of consumption are changing and are demanding different kind of diets and foods. But the case is not, the world is not prepared to supply more food. That is not a problem. More food will come. And with the commodity price that we have today, very shortly, maybe in 2 or 3 years, there will be again an overproduction of food.
Okay. Nächste Frage.
Next question then.
Hi, my name is Miguel Nicoleles. I'm a professor of brain research at Duke University in the United States and happen to be Brazilian at the same time. And I'm very curious, even though I don't work in this field, that we all know as scientists that the environmental issue is extremely indirectly linked to the question of how we are going to produce energy, how we're going to produce food, how we're going to control water, and etc. But when we come to Europe, we never hear that this discussion is intimately related also with agricultural subsidies, both in the United States and the European Union. If the subsidies that go up to $300 billion just disappear, food will be cheaper, countries will be able to compete better, because for many, many years, I grew up in Brazil, and we were told to compete, to be better, to produce better, and we can. And several other countries learn how to do that. But the playing field is not fair. It's not absolutely open to the free trade that everybody talks about, but very few people enforce. So I'd like to see if someone could address the issue of food subsidies or agriculture subsidies as a key issue on the environmental question.
Herr Steiner, bitte.
No.
Mr. Steiner?
I think you are absolutely right, and what we have seen over a decade and a half is a terribly frail attempt in Europe and the United States to address, in a sense, the pork barrel politics of subsidies. I would say that slowly in Europe we have begun to change the foundations of the common agricultural policy, and that to me gives some hope that, in a sense, this false imperative to distort production in Europe at the expense not only of the European taxpayer for that matter, but indeed the rest of the world, is beginning to give way. We saw in the Doha negotiations, however, that this isn't quite as fired as it had to be, because it was Europe, and particularly France, that continued to maintain these subsidies. I think you will hopefully see in the next few years that the pressure is increasing both from a commercial and economic policy, but also an environmental point of view, to correct that. It is even more dramatic in terms of a threat to the environment right now in fisheries. What we are doing to the world's fisheries at this moment with perverse subsidies is essentially condemning ourselves to have lost all our commercial fisheries in the world's oceans by somewhere around 2050, 2060. That is one scenario if we continue to fish the world's oceans at the current rate. And the extraordinary thing that I cannot understand as an economist, never mind as a citizen, is that these subsidies are justified on the basis of a trade that employs in some countries maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people. The European Union is fishing off the West African coast on fisheries agreements at the moment to a point where it is co-responsible not only for essentially destroying the fish stocks there, but also depriving artisanal fisheries communities along the coastline of West Africa of its most basic access to food in the long term. So subsidies and the environment and the global discussion in the context of world trade and free market policies is full of contradictions. And I think the environmental community is perhaps our best hope to get a more rational economic policy in place over the next 10 years.
Very briefly, the moderator.
Just quickly, I think we should raise the issue, not only just agriculture subsidies, and also the whole resource, because our whole population is growing, the whole world. In the resource, we're going down. We even don't know the trend of our couple, our, any kind of a natural resource. I think our human being only know how to make the plan 2 years, 5 years, 6 years. In the meantime, the whole world, the 50-year plan, we don't know where we are. We don't know where we have. Just like we know the end of the oil game. That's the reason we have ethanol. That's the reason we have other. I think we need the leaders thinking a little bit long-term, do the little bit longer-term plan, know where we are in resource. And because the resource environment, those other things are in competition at this moment, this time, and we don't know where we are. I think that question is much more fundamental than just agriculture subsidy.
The moderator, who would now like to ask a further question? At the back there, somebody. I'm from Appenzell in Switzerland. I have a question to Mr. Furlan. If bioethanol becomes a new worldwide fuel, which would replace petrol, then the global players, the big multinationals, will try to gain land, and they'll establish and fix the prices, and that's got to be as low as possible so that there's true competition. In your country, I know that there are people who are trying to find some land for themselves so that they can feed themselves and their families. And I wonder if this isn't going to lead to a tremendous conflict. Your President De Silva said that hunger is a problem and he wants to make a project there, or perhaps he already did it when he entered office. And now I see that if you are promoting bioethanol, for example, then there is going to be less land for these people who are seeking to have bits of land to feed themselves. The moderator, well, it's not really a question, it's an accusation rather, says the moderator.
I would say that ethanol will not be a global fuel and will not substitute petrol. Could be used as an additive, as it's forecasting to be used in Japan by 2010 by like 3% of blended to gasoline, or 10% like it is in California and also in Sweden and some other countries. And so it will not substitute. And how many oil companies you have worldwide? 100, maybe less. And ethanol producers, you can have millions everywhere, depending on the climate. So that is not a problem. The second issue is that Brazil is using today only 50% of the arable land, only 50%, not talking about the Amazon region. So we could double our production of everything in 10 years without destroying any tree. The other issue related to the poverty in Brazil, fortunately, after 5 years of President Lula period, every year 3 million people is emerging from the poverty to the low income class. And we have today 12 million families that are assisted with the allowance monthly to have at least 3 meals a day, committed that children are at school. And that is changing the country. We'll have a new generation, much better than the others. And just to mention also, last year, 2007, Brazil has achieved to be the 4th largest market worldwide for computers, due to a program lowering taxes in our country. So besides China, US, and Japan, Brazil is number 4 largest market for computers. 11 million computers were sold last year, and this year will be higher. So there is a transformation in the country in the area of social, also agriculture, but also technology. And biodiversity is being transformed in bioenergy and also in bioproducts and medicine. So there is a very good combination. You will keep having good news from my country, for sure.
About the oil.
Weitere Fragen, bitte schön.
Any further questions from the floor? Yes, someone at the back again.
In the healthcare sector, and it's a question to Mr. Steiner, in fact. Now, you mentioned earlier that you would want to skip a generation and make technology available to kind of the countries who have not yet those problems, like put it Bangladesh, for example. Now, would you actually imagine those countries would be able to sustain new technologies in the long run? And how would the rest of the world, or the countries that did make mistakes, react to this?
Well, it's always difficult to answer a question like this across all the different technologies, but let me give you a couple of examples why I think we really need to wake up. I live in Kenya at the moment. It's a country that has geothermal power. in the Rift Valley, which is a central part of the country, there is somewhere between 5,000 to 7,000 megawatts of power that could be generated from simply going into the ground and getting the heat out. In 50 years of development cooperation, energy infrastructure development, national investments, corporate investments, one little pilot plant of geothermal power generation has been built in Kenya. Why? If you have that resource there, why are we continuing to sell Africa the technology of yesterday and perhaps of today, when in Leipzig we are building a solar power station? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. We don't have solar energy to the same degree in eastern part of Germany as we have in Kenya. Right now, South Africa is facing a power crisis. It did not invest strategically and early enough in expanding its energy infrastructure. So what happens? Panic, and immediately we need solutions that are in place tomorrow. South Africa is now thinking of going down the nuclear path. It has one nuclear power station from many years ago. Eskom, the utility, has now been sold as the most economically viable option, a serious investment in nuclear energy. I have talked to Eskom. They have estimated it would take them about R1 billion to go into a significant renewable energy pathway. So why would the world, and the same is true for coal-fired power stations, why would the world not want to pay the difference for South Africa to choose right now the renewable energy path by subsidizing, if you want to use that word, or simply by supporting South Africa in taking that decision? Renewable energy is a classic example of either seeing Africa, which is going to spend, just Africa, hundreds of millions, in fact billions of dollars just in the next 10 years in establishing the energy infrastructure that it will be locked into for at least the next 20 to 30 years. 95% of the energy technology now being discussed on the African continent is hydro. Hydro is actually the smallest part. Hydrocarbons, i.e. oil and gas and coal. That is why I believe we have an interest in looking at helping developing nations to jump a technology generation. And yes, just like in Germany, when 10 years ago the Green Party said we should have wind energy. And in fact, everybody in Germany who produces renewable energy should have a guaranteed purchaser from the utilities. And we heard a lot about how this would be the end of energy markets in Germany, the economy would suffer, consumers would not pay. In less than 7 years, Germany managed to establish a wind power infrastructure that has made it the largest wind energy producer in the world. In fact, many do not know this. The installed capacity of wind turbines in Germany today is equivalent to the entire nuclear energy stock in Germany. 7 years with a good economic policy incentive, 40 years of nuclear energy with billions of dollars of subsidies. It's good economics and it is good for developing countries.
Noch eine Frage.
Another question, yes. The gentleman in the red pullover. I'm a geologist, and I would like to ask if the transport prices could in fact be taken into consideration. 3 cents is a low price. Isn't there a tremendous waste of energy because the container ships are so cheap? I'm speaking of transport between China and Switzerland, for example. The transport costs are nil almost. And the costs can't be covered, it seems to me. That's just not possible for it to cost nothing at all.
Okay.
The question or the comment. Would you like to comment? China.
I think the energy costs, at this moment, this time, and have a tremendous, it's not the real value. The real value of the energy, and I think at this moment, this time, we have not reached that yet. And even though the oil energy, the energy of oil and all those things are higher, but a lot of government subsidized in there too, including the shipping. I think the shipping cost maybe is relatively low because transport and those other value is much more significant. I think sooner or later it's going to be adjusted by the market demand.
Transport ist ein gutes Stichwort.
Transport, yes, that's a good term. It's 5 to 5. We have to close at 5 o'clock because the plane has to be caught by the minister from Japan so that he can return home. I thank you for all your questions, and I think we should conclude by giving everyone an opportunity to just say a few sentences from the panelists, that is. Perhaps you've got a message here in the audience with consumers. People are interested in climate protection, climate change. What's the most important point which you would like to contribute to and address to these people?
PCC がですね、去年ノーベル平和賞を取ったということは、これは世界の中でですね、もし気候変動に我々がきちんと手を打たなければ、世界の中には紛争がたくさん起こると、こういうことなわけであります。
So last year, 2007, IPCC was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. Then that implies without any actions taken against the climate change, it might be likely that there will be a lot of conflicts in the world.
我々がこのバリで合意をしたロードマップをですね、成功させるためには、3つの条件があります。繰り返しますけれども、1つは先進国がきちんとした形で途上国の支援をする。そしてですね、新興工業国に対しては、先ほど議論になりましたけれども、一つの技術をスキップして、そして一番最先端の技術を我々先進国が供与して共有をする、こういうような形で、すべての国がですね、協力をしなければ、この IPCC が言っている警告に対して、世界は対応できない、こういうようなことでありますから、これはここにいる一人一人も行動しなければいけないし、そしてすべての国の人たちが、ポリシーメーカーも含めて、すべてがきちんとした形で行動を取ると、こういうようなことを私は言って日本に帰ります。
So in Bali back last year, we have reached agreement on the roadmap. That is a tremendous success. And to make it success, to make a roadmap a success, there are three conditions to be met. I'd like to repeat as follows. First, developed countries have to extend support to the developing countries. And second, to the emerging countries or emerging economies, the technology, the state of art or latest technology, skipping one generation, have to be provided to the emerging countries from the developed countries, and then we have to share those latest technologies among the developing countries and emerging countries. So without such the global corporations, we have to suffer. That is the warned by IPCC reports. So we all individual, the people here in this room, are required to take actions immediately, and all the nations, and including any policymakers, are required to take immediate actions. So with that note, or with that message, I'd like to leave here for Japan.
Herzlichen Dank. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Mumenthaler, you only have to get into your car. You don't have to leave immediately, therefore. What's your message? 2 or 3 sentences, perhaps. Well, first of all, I'm optimistic and positive as regards the UN process. And I think it's important that this be said because it's extremely important for all of us. And secondly, the majority of people here, like me, are Swiss citizens. And I must say that so far we've done very, very little. Switzerland has done very little on this climate issue. And we would have the possibilities to take action. We've got excellent research institutes. We've got money. We've got research institutes. We have everything necessary to take action, but we're always reticent and fearful, and we've done very little really so far. And it's for us to motivate our politicians so that more is done, because we really do have the potential required.
Herr Furlan.
Mr. Furlan.
Well, I'm working for about 45 years, since I was 16. And most of my life I worked in the private sector in the food industry. And about 5 years ago I was invited to be Minister of Development of Brazil. And I left this position a few months ago. And my new challenge is conservation. So I'm in charge of a huge project of sustainability and conservation of 17 million hectares in the Amazon rainforest. It's totally wild, and I have some information I will leave here for those who are interested. And it's a kind of public and private partnership. We got the concession from the state of Amazonas, all approved by the Congress, for 20 years renewable for another 20 years. And we need to keep this part of the country as it is today, totally wild. Unfortunately, the Kyoto Protocol do not allow conservation to utilize carbon credits, because conservation is the least expensive way to fight global warming. And we will be trying to originate some kind of sponsorship and help in order to assist 8,500 families only that are living in this region. It's the size of England, this 17 million hectares, to have an idea. Only 8,500 families living along the rivers, in order they could be transformed in guardians of the forest, because the forest up have a better value than cut down. So my engagement from now on will be in an NGO. So that's why I'm here today, giving you a message that I'm trying to do what needs to be done.
Very good. Dankeschön.
Thank you. Mr. Kiang?
Yeah, I'm coming from a Peking University, that's an educational institute. And I think it's absolutely important to develop the next generation and the education, human resource, and to understand the world is changing and changing very rapidly. And I would like to say one thing, that's a Chinese saying, the best time to plant tree, for climate change was 100 years ago. The second best time is today, action time.
Very good.
Herr Kiang, danke schön.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kiang. And what is going to be your message, Mr. Steiner, for everybody going home? Well, I'm very happy that there was a campaign to plant 5 billion, and we have managed to bring people together to plant these trees. And we took opportunity of the second best time to plant these trees. Well, we have 23 months' time, I beg your pardon, to bring about some sort of agreement between 190 nations so that we can take a decision which will have decisive significance for our survival. And don't leave these 23 months just in the hands of other people's United Nations enterprises, governments, etc. When we meet in Copenhagen in 2009, then either there'll be agreement because you as individuals have made it possible that political interests and political excuses and other personal interests have prevented us from recognizing what the IPCC report and others have made clear. We don't have any alternative if we are going to reverse global warming than working together as a worldwide community. What we've experienced over the last 10 years will one day, in the next 10 years, by the future generation, think of us and should be labeled as weak. We have to act. We could act. We had the potential. But daily, we've always been made insecure. We've been made to believe that we couldn't do anything. But we have to think of our children and the future generations. Let's bear in mind that we have to do something in the next 10 to 15 years to ensure that there is a future for these young people. The IPCC said that in the next 7 to 10 years, we have to ensure that CO2 emissions have to be stabilized, and we have to reduce them to an absolute maximum. And I must say that when I left Bali, I was quite happy that we achieved what we had achieved there. But now I also left Bali, I have to say, and I felt, how is it that we still have so little understanding about community and the joint responsibility which we have? The two young men over there, I observed them and was happy to see them here. If the young generation, when two young men such as you spend an evening together with us and take time to listen to discussions, to take part in discussions, and we who are in positions of responsibility will have to act differently, because it's only then that we shall have the courage to take the necessary decisions. Therefore, I would like to say it's in your hands, ladies and gentlemen, whether you're in Switzerland, but wherever you are in your canton, in your community, start there where you can make a change, because actually it's from below that change will come about in this area. Thank you.
Das ist doch ein sehr konkreter.
Well, I think that was a very clear appeal to everybody, which we should all take home with us. Now I would like to express my thanks to all the gentlemen on the platform, on the panel here, and you in the audience for your interest. And please, could you leave the room as quickly as possible, because there's going to be another panel very shortly and things have to be reorganized. And I wish you much of success here in Davos.